in today's video we're going to be learning an arrangement of the Japanese folk tune Sakura for ukulele. This is done in a chord melody style which layers the melody and harmony together to create a really rich sound that worked wonderfully with this beautiful melody. We're going to feature some partial bar chords moving up and down the neck to allow that harmony to move as we play this beautiful melody. So this is a perfect lesson for anyone who's looking for this chord melody style or just trying to get more comfortable with bar chords and being able to get good tonality as you press over multiple strings at a time. Let's go ahead and dive in. It looks something like this with the tab on screen. If you'd like to download a copy of this tab, there's a link right over here on my Patreon page. Every month I do a vote based on suggestions of patrons, and this happened to win this month's vote just in time for cherry blossom season. So let's go ahead and dive in, take a look. These first three bars look something like this, and they're going to sound something like this. So to play this, it's really important to use the correct fingerings at each stop because the fingerings are going to allow movement to be really fluid as we go up and down the neck. We're going to start here with this C5 chord, 0033, and I'm going to play this with my middle finger here on the 3rd fret of the E string and my ring finger here on the 3rd fret of the A string. Now as far as the playing hand goes, the whole time I'm going to be using my thumb rest stroke, also called melodic picking. I've got a video on this technique linked right over here, so if you're unfamiliar with it, please check that out. But basically I'm just strumming through with the thumb to create that tone. Now these two fingers are stacked on top of each other, getting right up next to that fret wire to make sure that they get a good, clear, crisp sound as I go across all three. Then I'm going to play the 3rd fret on the A string again. Before going to kind of the second chord here, you'll see it says 0235. So look at where we're at. This middle finger, it's going to stay put. My index finger is going to come over to the 2nd fret of the C string, and my pinky is going to stretch up to the 5th fret of the A string. When I do this, the ring finger naturally kind of pops up, and the fingers become a little bit more straight up and down. You'll notice with the chord just before, my fingers kind of tilted towards my shoulder. Now they're going to go more straight up and down. These angles can really help open up the fingers for good tonality. We strum through that chord. So the little first measure there looks something like that. Going into the second measure, first little partial bar chord. So a bar chord is when we bar across the strings with our finger. A partial bar is when we only do some of the strings. And you'll notice we use a lot of partial bars in this arrangement, this being the first one. This is technically a C minor chord. Take your index finger, bar it across the C, E, and A strings all the way while leaving the G string open. A quick tip on the bar, if you haven't done them much before, is make sure that you get right up next to that fret wire, and it can actually help to rotate your finger a little bit away from the wire so that you can cinch it in a little closer. You'll see that my fingernail actually kind of rotates towards the headstock, and that leaves me a little bit more room to pinch inside. For people with bigger fingers, this can be really helpful to just get the connection to be good because we just want to be right up next to that fret wire. Make sure that you're even with the pressure. If you're getting this type of sound, oftentimes that's because you're not pulling back enough to be sure that that A string gets pinched. But we're going to play through this chord now, and then the 3rd fret on the A string. And then we're going to take this partial bar and we're going to move it up to the 5th fret. And we're going to add the ring finger here on the 7th fret of the C string and the middle finger here to the 6th fret of the E string. So the index is doing the partial bar, right? You can see how it is barred. And then the ring and middle fingers are going to be more creased on that first knuckle to make sure that they are getting a good release. And what I mean by that is you'll see that they're not coming down and touching the strings below. They need to be really articulate while that index is on the partial bar. This is challenging if you haven't done it before, but it creates this sound when you strum through. That's our 0765. Now technically you could do this, right? Which you might think is simpler, but when you're moving from here to here, the bar helps make it much more fluid. And that second measure sounds like this. Going to the 3rd measure here, no partial bar at this point. We're going to build a different version of a C minor chord. To do this, take your middle finger, place it on the 7th fret of the C string, ring finger on the 8th fret of the E string, and finally the index finger is going to just kind of hang out here around fret 5. You don't need to press it yet. You're going to start by playing your G, C, and E strings together. And then you add the index here on the 5th fret of the A string and strike that. before then moving it up 1 fret to fret 6 and strum through all 4 strings, and then move it back down to fret 5 and strike that. So measure 3. That can be a bit of a stretch if you haven't done it before. If the fingers have to come off, it's okay, but we try to leave them on so that we can get good legato, which means to play smoothly by leaving the fingers all in place. So these first 3 bars should sound something like this. Now we go on to measures 4 through 6, and they're going to sound something like this. So to play these, we're going to start with that bar, the partial bar across the 3rd fret here at the beginning of measure 4. Just the 3rd fret with the index finger. Strum through all 4 strings. Then we're going to play 5 on the A with our ring finger here. 3 on the A string by taking the ring off, leaving the bar where it is. And then we need to play this a little F minor chord, and we're going to keep the partial bar in place here. We don't move it, and we're just going to add the ring finger on the 5th fret of the C string and our middle finger here on the 4th fret of the E string. I'm going to strike my C and E strings together. And then you'll see the next note here is a 3, but it's in parentheses. So what this means is that it's an optional filler note. And when you see these on the tabs that I make, they are symbolizing that you can play them for some extra texture, but they're not required. And if you do play them, try to play them softer so that the listener knows that they are filler. And that's all that's happening here. So I play that 3 super soft. And the partial bar there is nice because it makes it easier to transition. One other quick note, I'm playing on a high G ukulele. This works with both high G and low G. But if you're playing with a high G like I am, it can sound really good to add that 0 on the G with that 5 and 4 on the chord there. Create some really nice texture. Just something that you can add if you like it. Going into the 5th measure here, we're going to take the middle and ring fingers off, leaving the bar where it is, play our G, C, and E strings, stopping on the A. Then play the C, E, the E string again with the 4th fret, adding our middle finger here. And that sounds like this, measure 5. Going into the 6th measure here, really important little step. We're going to take the index off so the bar is not there anymore, and the middle finger slides down to the 3rd fret of the E string. We're going to strike our G, C, and E together. And then we're going to play the 3rd fret on the E string again before playing the 3rd fret on the C string with the index finger. Now notice the angle of the fingers here. You see how steeply they're coming over to my playing hand's shoulder? That's really important to create the clearance for that finger to come up and in. And the reason we do this is because the next note we play is going to be the 2 on the C by sliding that index back down to the 2nd fret of the C string, leaving the middle finger where it was. And then we play the 3 on the E as an optional note, and the 5 on the A with the pinky as an optional note, just like we did earlier for a little bit of filler. Measure 6 sounds something like this. And measures 4, 5, and 6 should sound something like this. Going into the 7th measure now, measures 7, 8, and 9 should sound something like this. So it starts off similarly to how we played some parts, but a little bit different. Measure 7, we're going to play that same 0, 0, 3, 3 chord that we've actually played a couple times to this point, but we're going to finger it a little bit differently. Instead of using the 2 fingers like we did before, just take your index and use a partial bar across the 3rd fret of the E and the A strings, just pressing on that. We're going to strum through all 4 strings. And we're going to add 5 on the A with the ring finger, and then 6 on the A with the pinky. And we go back down to 5 on the A with the ring. Pretty straightforward measure once we get that bar comfortable. Sounds something like this. Going into the 8th measure, well, this 5 is holding the A string. I'm going to keep it compressed, and I'm going to work on then lifting my finger and moving it to partial bar across the C, E, and A strings, so that then when I go into measure 8, I can take this ring finger off and strum through. So as I play that last note of 7, it can be helpful to move the finger to position so that I can then strum through all 4 notes to start on measure 8. And that makes it a lot more seamless coming out of it. Then we play the 5 and 3 on the A string before playing the 5 and 4 on the C and E. And then you play the filler on the 3 on the A. And if this looks familiar, that's because, well, it is. This measure that we just played here on measure 8 is exactly the same as what we played on measure 4, which is pretty neat. And moving into the 9th measure here, it should look familiar because it is exactly the same as what we played on measure 5. So the same partial bar across the 3rd fret being held, strum the G, C, E, and then play the C, E, and then the E string 4th fret with the middle finger. So that is exactly the same. So 7, 8, and 9 should sound something like this. Again, making sure you use the partial bar at 7. As we go on to measure 10 here, measure 10 is going to look very familiar because measure 10 is exactly the same as what we played on measure 6, which means this middle finger needs to slide down to the 3rd fret of the E string. And to start measure 10, we're going to play the G, C, and E together on that 3rd fret on the E. Play the 3 on the E again, cross that index up to the 3rd fret of the C string, and then move it down to the 2nd fret of the C string before the 2 filler notes of 3 on the E and the 5 on the A with the pinky added there. So measure 10, very familiar, should sound like this. And what's neat is as we go into measure 11, you're going to see that it looks the same as what we started with at the beginning. So measure 10 kind of acted almost like a little bit of a repeat for the tune. And so measure 11 goes to, and measure 12, you can hear are exactly the same as what we played on measures 1 and measure 2. The same movement with the melody going up and the harmony moving up the fretboard. Sounds absolutely wonderful, a lot of fun to play. I love how this melody came out. All of these measures, measures 10, 11, and 12, should sound something like this, going all the way through. Now, as we go on to measures 13 through 15 here, things do change a bit, and it ends up sounding something like this. So to play this on 13, what we want to do is we want to think about where we were coming from. So at the end of measure 12, we actually were playing the 7, 6, 5 with a little partial bar there. So to go into 13, we're just going to take this and we're going to slide it down 2 frets. We're going to play the 5th fret on the C string. And then we need to play the 3rd fret on the E string. And we can do that by just taking the middle finger off, holding this partial bar with the index finger. Now, if this full bar here across the C, E, and A is too tricky, it is okay to just be on the 3rd fret of the E and the A strings. You can actually have that movement take place. But you do want to make sure you're doing at least the E and the A, because that allows you to play the 3rd fret on the E string. And then to play the 3rd fret or 4th fret on the E string, you add the middle finger. And then the 3rd fret on the A string is there as part of the bar. So it makes it a little bit easier with this measure 13. Now measure 14 is pretty tricky. It's going to go to this little 5, 4, 5. And the way we do that is we hold this finger here and we hold this finger here and we put our pinky finger on the 5th fret of the A string. Now in doing this, oftentimes what happens is the index finger kind of kicks off, and that's normal, but if we can keep it with the little partial bar there, that's preferred. This is pretty, it's yoga for your fingers at this point. But by doing this, then I strum through those 3 notes and I play the A string 3rd fret by taking the pinky off, which is already there. And then the 4th fret on the E, You see that kind of is all built. If your index comes off there, it's okay. Just make sure you get comfortable placing it back on after the pinky plays the 5 on the A. But after we played that 5 and 3, so it has the into the 4, we now move our middle finger down 1 fret and move the ring finger off the ukulele and our index up to 2 on the C and play our G, C, and E strings together, just holding it. And that makes measure 15 sound something like this. Now this is actually normally the formal end to this song. So if you want to be more authentic, ending it here at the end of measure 14 is actually preferred. It's the different versions that I found, it was pretty unanimous that this would be the ending of the tune. I decided to keep going on just a little bit because I based some of this arrangement on other arrangements I've heard of Sakura, including Jake Shimabukuro's version. And so I think there's some elements of ending it by going through the melody again that are quite nice. But if you want to be, true to the original, then this is actually your ending here at measure 14. Hence the 2 little double lines there to kind of symbolize that. But from here, if you want to continue moving on, measure 15 is the same as measure 1. Going back to that same motif we've done a few times. So measures 13, 14, and 15 should sound something like this. And now as we go on to 16 through the end, it's going to sound something like this. So I just love this high chord. I think it sounds so lovely, so I had to throw it in here to end the arrangement. And so to play this, well, it starts off the same way as we played other parts. Measure 16 is exactly the same as measure 2 was, and that's also the same as measure 12. So the same partial bar across the 3rd fret, moving to a partial bar across the 5th, adding the ring and middle fingers here. Measure 17 starts off the same way as measure 3 did. All of that's exactly the same, starting with that 7 and 8 on the C and the E, index on the 5, strum through all of it with the index moving up to 6. But then it changes here. Changes by adding the pinky finger on the 8th fret of the A string. And that measure has now an ascending sound. Before the last chord that's played here on measure 18, we slide the pinky up to 10 and use your middle finger here on the 8th fret of the E string, strum through all 4 strings. And when you play that all together, measures 16, 17, and 18, it should sound something like this. And that wraps up this beautiful melody. Bringing the camera back up. Again, if you'd like to download the tab, it is linked over in the description and this card over here. I do a different vote based on suggestions of patrons every single month, and it's always fun to see what you come up with for lessons. So if you're a member, thank you so much for your patronage. I so appreciate it. And if you're not, thank you for checking it out and considering supporting it. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time on the next lesson here on this YouTube channel. Click the subscribe button, give this video a like, it helps all the YouTube algorithm stuff, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you so much.